All right, so hi everyone, my name's Sam and this is the Masters Information session that I promised a few weeks ago on the Postgrad Psych pages. Just a little bit of background about me. My name's Sam. I just finished my honours degree in late June, and since then I've had a lot of free time to look into the whole Masters application process, which I think is quite complicated and it's a bit of a black box. And I know a lot of people are still studying their honours and they don't really have time to look into the whole process, so I thought it'd be useful to make a video with someone who's been through it.
Yeah.
And just answer some of the most commonly asked questions. I've done a fair bit of research into the process just by talking to ex-students, supervisors, looking at different videos, different internet resources and whatnot. So hopefully I'll be able to contribute as well. But yeah, we've got Samantha here. She's doing her master's at the moment. So Sam, do you prefer Samantha or Sam?
Sam's fine. Sam's fine.
Sam's fine. Cool. Two Sams. Great.
Yeah.
So do you want to just introduce yourself, what course you're studying, your course, your pathway to get there, and what your future goals are as well?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Sam. So I'm Sam. I am a student studying the Masters of Professional Psychology. I've completed all of the coursework for the Masters. I just have my placement subject that I'm completing currently. So I have completed an undergraduate in psychological science. Then I did a postgraduate certificate in mental health, which is the first half of the mental health nursing masters. I also completed my psychological science honours in 2021. And then last year in 2022, I got into masters. And I've been studying that part-time, which is why I only have placement at the moment. I do have the goal to try and transfer into clinical masters for next year and do that part-time. Otherwise, I would be having the goal to complete the internship as the second half of the MPP, and that would be where I currently work. And on top of all of this, I work with a approved AWOP 76 form with APRA, and that is to work as a provisional psychologist in a private practice as well.
Okay, awesome. So do I have it right that if you're enrolled in a master's program, you're eligible to be a provisional psychologist? Is that right?
So yes and no. To enroll in a master's program, you must have your provisional psychology registration. Now, it's not something that you can get to apply for masters. You have to be accepted into a master's course and then apply. So technically you will be a provisional psychologist, but you're not allowed to work as a provisional psychologist unless you have extra approval through APRA. So APRA is the kind of the big body that everybody's registered under in psychology and in optometry, dentistry, nursing. A lot of the medical professionals are registered under APRA.
Right.
So you have to fill out separate forms and there's requirements within that as well. So my requirements include every 6 months, my supervisor has to fill out a form that has to have the amount of hours I've done for work, the amount of hours I've had for supervision, and they have to observe 2 sessions of me working with the client and then give me feedback to see if I'm competent to continue for another 6 months. On top of that, I still have to be enrolled in a master's program. You can't just do it without studying because you actually hold your registration without being enrolled in a master's program as a prov psych. And then on that, you have to have a supervisor and have minimum requirements for supervision.
Right, okay. So a lot of that would be somewhat similar to the 4+2 program, a lot of those requirements and stuff?
A little bit. The 4+2 program is a lot more in depth and kind of like working full-time and studying full-time at the same time. But with this, it's kind of like you have to have the kind of set up requirements similar to the 4+2.
Right. So as I know, the 4+2 has been wiped out. It's concluded, I think 2 years ago. So that's not an option anymore for oncoming students.
So unfortunately, it did end last year in the middle of the year. So July last year was the last kind of space for intake. I actually initially had applied and got my job to do the 4+2, and I got a last minute admission to masters because a space had opened up and I was next on the list who'd been approved, so it just happened to work out. And then I was really lucky that my supervisor, who does have to be board approved, was happy for me to continue with an AWOP form in that space. But you can work as a counsellor because counsellor is not a protected title.
Right. Okay. So I guess that makes something this video even more sort of important and useful, because everyone from now on's going to have to do a master's program to get to become
Yeah.
a psychologist going forward.
Yeah, so registration requirements have now changed. Those who are currently completing the 4+2, whether that's full-time or part-time, they have until, I believe, 2027 or 28. They've got about 4 years left to complete. If they do not complete it within that time period, then it's obsolete. They actually can't get registration. They'll have to return to a master's program. But now you must have a master's as part of the, people are calling it bottlenecking, but as part of the education requirements based on society and what we need to know as clinicians to work with individuals who may potentially be more complex or present with different things, we need to have a master's for education.
Yeah, right. I always found it a bit odd with the 4+2, how someone could be somewhat experienced enough and know enough to become even a provisional psychologist after 4th year, because I think most people who have done their first 4 years could agree that you don't learn a whole bunch of therapeutic skills, counseling skills, assessment skills really until 4th year. So it always surprised me that someone could do a 2-year internship after, but I guess you're saying they did a lot of sort of study on the side during that placement. It wasn't just getting experience, it was also learning from their supervisor and doing professional experience as well.
Yeah, so ultimately, and because I haven't done the internship, but I did look into it. Also, I want to apologize, that's the cat. That's the
No
cat
worries.
who just wants attention, but not to be loved, just wants someone to look at her. So she won't.
Okay, no worries.
Letting everybody know.
All good. We'll be prepared.
Yeah, so my supervisor did the 4+2, and honestly, it is actually a very, very fantastic and very, very important pathway that I personally believe, in a lot of clinicians and people in professionals in the field believe that should not have been taken away. But ultimately, it's incredibly intense. So people who've looked into the MPP, so the pathway that has come about because of the closure of the 4+2, you have 1 year masters and 1 year internship. That internship is pretty intense. Imagine doubling that in length and then adding extra work on top of that. That's what the 4+2 is like. But you learn everything on the floor. You've got board approved supervisors. If you work better, like learn better from working, it is a very, very viable and a brilliant option. Otherwise, you are in the classroom for 1 to 2 years, and you only get really, really heavily screened clients on placement. So you're actually not working with complex until you're doing external placements or you're doing, you're out in the workforce. So the 4+2 definitely has a space that there's a lot of advocacy to bring it back, but utilizing some improvements to it, as well as work safe requirements and fair work. But yeah, it's definitely a viable space, but the MPP is what the 4+2 now looks like, but it's called a 5+2.
And and I've also heard they're making a lot more programs to sort of make up for the amount of students that can't do those 4+2 pathways anymore. So there should be more MPP programs popping up around the place.
Yeah, supposedly. However, the funding, it's all about funding and it's all about investment. So it's not, and I wish it was as simple as being able to go, oh, cool, we'll have, we can do an intake of 100 or 150 students for masters per year. But the reality is they can only offer the amount of spots for masters that they have available for placements for that year.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So because you have to complete placement in your first year of masters, regardless of what masters that you do. So if you do the MPP or the MCP, you must have a placement, which the university is supposed to find out for you and seek for you, unless there's a clause where you have to find your own. And that tends to be the online spaces mostly, but they've got to have enough supervisors to cover you and their workload. They have to have enough positions open. And we will see more open up because individuals who have been doing the 4+2, all those people who are board approved supervisors supervising them, once their students finish up, well, not students, their internships finish up, they're going to have those spots open for placement. So that's where we're going to see more spots open up because more people, it'll free up when the 4+2 over up until 2027 will sort of fade out, everybody who's currently completing. and we'll see more spots. And this is where mid-year intake has been helpful, is because there's been a couple of spots open up.
Yeah, as far as my research showed, there was only like two universities that took mid-year intakes in Victoria, at least. I think that was ISN and Federation Uni.
Yes.
So hopefully that also increase going forward.
Yeah, it is a hard space. So I'm at one of those universities, and there was the mid-year intake, and the way that the structure changed was quite difficult to manage. So you can see why a lot of other universities haven't opened it up, because it's still very rocky. To be honest, though, the MPP has barely been around as well. So they're still trying to iron out all the details and all the issues that arise, as every course has. But ultimately, the mid-year intake just means that it runs slightly different. So you do different classes to what the start of the year cohort would be doing in their semester, which would be your first.
Yeah, I actually did my honours like that. I started mid-year as well, which is why I finished in June. So I sort of experienced that a bit of a weird overlap, where my last semester I also did it part-time. So my last semester I was in a class with a bunch of people that I hadn't studied with up to that point. And I was doing my last unit and they were doing their first. It was a bit confusing, but yeah, if it offers people more spots, that would be a good thing. So I guess we'll get into the more formal questions now. But I just want to start with a disclaimer for everyone, and just to take this seriously, because it is really important. All the advice and all the information we're going to give today is going to be extremely general. It's not university specific. Every university has very different requirements for their applications. They're looking for slightly different things. They take slightly different amounts of time. So everything we talk about today is going to be general. It's important that people who are looking at specific unis do their own research. We're just going to give a bit of an overview. And I'm also not going to ask any sort of specific questions about interview questions. People did send in some very specific questions, but unfortunately, just from an ethical standpoint, we can't really go into that. We're just going to keep it pretty broad. So make sure you do your own research. Do you want to add anything to that, Sam, in terms of disclaimers and whatnot?
Yeah, I think just recognizing that is very general, and that we're talking kind of specifically for Australia as well. And just recognizing that if you're looking to do masters or anything, or take this advice and be living overseas and wanting to study, by correspondence online, I'm losing my words already, or you're looking to complete here and then work overseas as a psychologist, this information doesn't actually apply, because of registration requirements that are required, that you must have 4 masters doesn't allow you to do that. And just also putting out there that this is coming from research that we've both done, my experience as well, information, from gathered from attending information nights, and people in different cohorts as well. So I study not only along MPP students, but MCP students as well. So I get to hear about their experience over 4 cohorts. Awesome.
Cool. All right, so we'll get into the questions. So we're going to start pretty broad, just for sort of anyone looking at psychology as a potential study option, maybe for even high school students, and then we'll get a little bit more into the specific stuff for masters. So we kind of already covered this, but is masters required to become a psychologist in Australia? So from now on, pretty much yes, hey?
Yeah, as of officially mid-year last year, so a year ago, you must have a master's to obtain general registration without any provisions, unless prior to July you were enrolled within the 4+2 program.
Yeah, cool. And what's required to be in a master's course? What sort of previous study history do you need? Anything else?
So the traditional pathway is a undergraduate degree in psychology that can look, some universities call it different. So it can be psychological science, psychology, behavioral science. There's a couple others out there. And it must be an APA accredited course as well. You must then complete a 4th year equivalent. So either an honours degree, which the honours degrees tend to be psychology honours, or advanced or psychological science honours, or the equivalent as a grad dip, so a graduate diploma in psychology. then the master's. Now, if you do not hold an undergraduate degree in psychology, but you want to become a psychologist and you have a different undergraduate degree, there is a pathway that you can take. So that is by doing a graduate diploma. That is a bridging program. So it is a pathway. It's about 12 to 18 months. That provides you very intense, short period time. That wasn't really worded very well. It provides really intense kind of 12 to 18 months where you've got to learn everything from undergrad to then be able to apply for honours or a graduate diploma advanced. So you must have 2 in that space, and then you can apply for masters.
Right. Okay. I know some people get confused about the difference between honours and the advanced graduate diploma, but from what I've understood, it's the exact same year. I know, for example, Monash have an honours cohort and a graduate diploma cohort, but they do the exact same coursework. I believe the only difference is sometimes the fees are a little bit higher for the advanced graduate diploma. But yeah, you're doing the exact same thing. And what really differentiates the honours year from undergrad is the research project you do, and that's independent research. So a lot of students end up publishing their research towards the end of the year, and the whole year is focused on just psychology. So you're not really learning anything, you're not doing any electives, you're not doing anything outside the area of psychology. And it's actually quite clinician focused from what I've seen in my experience. And I know most courses are quite similar. So you're doing a lot of stuff around assessment, ethics, research methods, evidence-based practices, stuff like that. So it's exciting for people because in the first 3 years, obviously there's not a whole lot about the actual role of a psychologist. But in 4th year, you start getting into that stuff. Is that kind of right in the differentiation between the two?
Yeah, and I suppose about like just in regards to requirements and everything having to be APAC accredited as well. So ultimately the undergrad is your foundational skills of what is psychology. Depending on your university and their program, what you learn is different. So for my example, because I graduated, so I finished my undergrad in 2019, so right before COVID, and ultimately I was really, really lucky that I had psychological assessment, counseling skills. They were all core subjects for us. They were just core things. And when you do honours, you get kind of introduced to those spaces. And when I was completing honours, there was actually quite a few people in the cohort who'd never sat any subjects around counselling before in their undergraduate. And then in masters, there are actually people in one of the current cohorts that I'm a part of, because doing part-time, I've gone across 4 separate intakes. Well, 4 separate. There are some people who never learnt about psych assessment until they sat their class psych assessment in masters. So they've spent 4 years not learning that. So it depends on your university, but you do see a bit of a shift from kind of like writing assignments and being a student and learning about psychology to, all right, now we're looking at more research and clinician based in honours, but then there's a massive shift. When you're in masters, it's actually it's all about becoming a clinician. So you don't get foundational knowledge. It's expected that you already know all the basics. So it's kind of, you start to have a transition to clinician, and we see that transition start in honours. So yeah, kind of your experience is kind of similar to my experience as well.
Yeah. I always say to people that ask about studying psychology that the first 3 years kind of prepare you to be a scientist, and I think that you can be a little bit cynical about and think, why would you learn how to be a scientist studying psychology? But it becomes more apparent why that is when you do 4th year, and I'm sure for masters as well, to get that sort of critical thinking skills. And psychologists are meant to be, scientists, practitioners, so they're meant to understand the literature on certain evidence-based practices. So that's why you do get that foundation in science that moves on to more practical skills that you learn in masters. So as I hear a lot of the lectures and the web and the tutorials, very sort of practical based, where you'll be doing like role plays and things like that. That's pretty common, right?
Yeah, role play is the bane of everyone's existence, right?
Yeah, I hear.
Yeah. So ultimately, you actually come out. So we were informed when I had finished my undergrad that we were actually classified as scientists of psychology. So there is a lot of a heavy science base, and it's because we must work under an evidence-based practice. You learn about that mostly in masters, but you touch on it a bit in honours, and that is because you're working with people. And at the end of the day, psychology is a science. It is classified as it's not a pseudoscience. So we actually have requirements within that field to meet, and that comes across our education and our practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I think we've covered that quite well. So let's move on to what are the current pathways to registration? So we've got, obviously we've got the endorsement pathways and then the MPP you've spoke about. This sort of gets into the most controversial question, and it's a huge debate topic within psychology about, the clinical masters versus masters of professional psych. How about I give a little bit of an outline of what I see the difference is, and you can kind of fill in the gaps and tell me if I'm wrong. But this is kind of what I've seen from just talking to people doing my research, because it is just such a highly debated topic. So the MPP is, as you said, it's the 1 year of study followed by a 1 year internship, and then in that 1 year you'll also do the graduate, so the national psychology exam, where you'll kind of do a multiple choice exam on everything you've learned up to that point, and you'll also have to do a few case reports and some observation that you've spoke about. And then after that, you'll be generally registered as long as all of that goes well. And if you do a master's, if you do an endorsement pathway, I think this is something that a lot of people don't know and get confused about, but no matter what endorsement pathway you do, you are generally registered at the end of that. So whether it's clinical masters, whether it's organizational psychology, whether it's forensic psychology, counseling psychology, at the end of all of those 2 year master's programs, you are generally registered, but then you are endorsed in a specific area after you do a 2 year registrar program, which pretty much just looks like working out in the field, but also doing supervision under someone who has that particular endorsement. So I think that's what makes Australia quite unique. And some people don't really like the system, because you could do a Masters of Organizational Psych, for example, and at the end of that, you would be generally registered as a psychologist, but you wouldn't have really learned anything clinician-based, if that makes sense. So people kind of get a little bit confused about that differentiation. In terms of the clinical versus professional, which is sort of the main topic, to me, it seems like clinical psychs can work in slightly more complex areas. So maybe they're slightly seen more in hospitals and healthcare settings, maybe working with more complex clients, but they do a lot of the same stuff that general psychs do. And I think the big area of difference is that obviously that pay difference, with the Medicare rebates being slightly or significantly higher for clinical psychs, who can therefore charge more for their clients. So psychologists working in private practice, you'll obviously be able to make more money as a clinical psych, which is why it's quite a popular pathway to choose. But yeah, as I said before, at the end of that clinical masters, you are generally registered, same as someone who did the MPP, but then you do the extra 2 years. That gives you that experience in that field. Is that sort of generally quite accurate? And do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I really want to highlight what you've mentioned, Sam, around regardless of what pathway you take, once you finish your education, everyone is a general psychologist. You cannot be a clinical psych straight out of clinical masters. And there is a lot of confusion around this, because you get told, but it depends on your lectures. It depends on who your tutors are. It depends on kind of like your accessibility and what the university talks to you about and what you discuss with peers. But the only difference is that once you complete an MCP, you must complete a 2-year endorsement program. Now that is, like you said, it is a full-time job. You do get jobs offered to you, or people, you kind of like at the end of masters each year, they'll have meetings where there'll be offers for MCP programs and MPP internships locally in that area. So there'll be people going, hey, we want to take on 5 people. You just have to do a cover letter, send in your resume. We'll give you your paid supervision. So you don't have to pay for that. So that's a really big thing as well. It is very expensive. You'll be in this for 2 years at the minimum. You'll have a full-time job. This is what the days look like. So it's not something that you have to source yourself fully. The university should be providing kind of some avenues for you to explore. You just have to attend those information meetings. But ultimately, if you haven't a clinical master's and you don't do that 2-year endorsement, you will still be a general psych. It's not until you complete the 2 years and the requirements. I haven't looked into that fully, as I'm not currently in the endorsement. But it is, as you said, 2 years of supervision, which is most likely at kind of probably a weekly basis or so. That's what I'm assuming. but once again, I don't actually know.
Mhm.
You're still a general psych in that space. The content that you learn in across the two is that you tend to, in the clinical masters, learn more in the second year around more complexity. However, I want to really highlight that universities see, like, when you get taught complexity, it tends to be anybody who doesn't have anxiety and depression. So
Yeah.
complexity, you know, there are some things that happened where we were told you don't learn about that until second year in MCP. So things like conduct disorder. But the reality is most people who work in community services with either a diploma or a certificate work with conduct disorder every day. So it's kind of that space of what does the university see as complex and what they want you to see. But out in the field, a general psych will see the same people that a clinical psych will. It just depends on where you work, and it also depends on what people you're wanting to take on. But the main thing is the pay difference. And at the end of the day, it's all about experience, and you can have general registration and the competencies are the same anyway between the two. But you know, it doesn't mean that you're kind of only in the counselling space as a general psych. You can do pretty much anything. You can jump into forensic, but there are spaces in forensic that require clinical endorsement. However, you can go into that space as a gen psych.
Right, cool. Yeah, so I think people make a bigger deal of the differences between the two than actually exist. I think there's probably a little bit more overlap than people would think. And yeah, it's really, as you said, I think it's really about where you get your experience, where you do your professional, professional experience outside of your clinical work. So obviously someone who does the MPPs, who's a general psych, could work with eating disorders. They could work with schizophrenia. They could work with kids. They could work in sports. They could work in forensic. It doesn't really matter whether you've done the clinical or not. It's where you get your experience. But if you have that clinical masters, you might be able to be more employable in, I think, government roles and hospitals is the two areas that I've seen are probably more geared towards clinical psychs. And you can look this up. Anyone could look this up from home. If you just go on Seek and look up clinical psychologist jobs, you can kind of see what areas that are looking for that endorsement. And it seems to be in those two areas. But as we said, more overlap than differences for sure.
Yeah, a lot more overlap than you think, a lot more. And also where you live as well, metropolitan might be more geared towards clinical, to having medical settings. However, regional, I live regionally, probably more likely to see your general psychs in, you know, hospitals and stuff. But if we look at the whole mental health system, realistically, most of the people that work in that field in hospitals in mental health are OTs, nurses, speechies. So these are people who don't have psychology and they're working in that space. So it's just one of the things of where do you want to work, where do you live, and looking at what their requirements are. And most of the time they want just one clinical psych on the team, and any other psychs will be general psychs because that's, you know, who they want. So
yeah, and it's a large majority of the workforce as well. I think I saw a statistic about at least 60% of the workforce in Australia are just generally registered. So it's the majority of the workers out there.
It's really interesting you raise that because ultimately it actually doesn't matter which endorsement. We know that there's multiple domains of endorsement in psychology, not just clinical, but clinical endorsement is the only one that you have to do the 2 years endorsement program, and is the only one that has a higher Medicare rebate. So if you're endorsed in organizational or sports or ed and dev, you are still a general psych. You don't have clinical psych. So you can't get that higher rebate for the client. So I guess at the end of the day, the key difference is, who are you working for? Are you working because you want to impact other people, you want to work with people, or are you working for yourself? And ultimately, we're in a people-based business and business-based field. For me, it's about allowing the client to have as much back as possible and making things more accessible. And accessibility means affordability. And if they get more of a rebate, that is fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. I think we've answered that. Let's move on. So how to find master's programs. So I'll just highlight this website. If you look up apac.au/accredited-programs/search a program, there's a really great thing you can use where you can put in your state and the provider name and the level of study. So under the level of study, if you look at level 3 and level 4, or level 3 to 4, that'll pretty much show you every MPP or MClin MClin Psych program that's in Australia. And then you can also download a full list of those programs, and they'll export it onto Excel for you. So that works out quite well. So that's a good little thing to search for programs.
Yeah,
Do you want to add anything to that?
It's not just for masters. So to actually get into honours and then to get into masters, you must have approved an APAC accredited course. So if you're completing an and look, most if not all psych undergrads are accredited, but who knows what the future holds, and audits and stuff. You can't actually apply unless it's accredited. So this is a really good tool. The APAC website is really fantastic. I recommend everybody to utilize it because it's kind of created for students or people wanting to go into the field who haven't already studied, like already are registered, sorry. But it's really good to look at undergrad as well. And it shows they've got some really good pictures and diagrams of what kind of the process looks like. So if you're more visual, they have a diagram of like, you know, the undergraduate, then it goes down to the honours and it has all the equivalents and then what that can lead to and then what you have to do next. So I really recommend that kind of as the point of contact for the pathways.
Yeah, awesome. So we kind of covered this already, but can I transfer from MPP to MClin? So yes, in most universities, but not all.
Yes, not all. Now, I am aware that at my university there is a really good kind of internal transfer, but it's not just because you've completed the first year. You've got to have really good grades. You've got to do well on your placement as well, but not just kind of, oh, I think I've done well. Supervisors, so you have 2 to 3 supervisors on placement. They have to kind of provide really good feedback for you. It's all about your capacity to become a clinician. So it's not about you as well as how well you write your notes or how fast you do things. It's all about the outcome of treatment with your clients and then your capacity, how you've been able to reflect and grow in capacity in that space. But then on top of that, your work experience, and then outside of all that, your capacity, so, and your references. So you can do an internal transfer, which what that looks like at my university is the MPP and MCP, you're a joined cohort. The only difference is that the MPP doesn't have as much CSP funding as the MCP does. If you're in a CSP spot, if you're in a full fee, I'm so sorry, but it is expensive. Which is another thing I think we're going to be touching on later.
Yeah, we'll get into the fees a little bit later.
You're sitting the same classes. So at my university, once you complete your MPP, the first year, you don't have to do the internship to transfer. You've already completed your first year of the MCP. So you get immediate credit for the first year of the MCP and you get transferred into the second year. Now, not all unis do the same. Some, if you were to transfer from one uni to another, I have seen that people have had to repeat the first year or repeat subjects, or they weren't able to get CSP. So it depends on the university, and cross unis isn't as a good of a transfer as kind of like internal, but recognizing what if you're looking for an internal transfer, you are going up against external applicants as well.
Yeah, you're almost reapplying for that second year in a way with all those, you know, how you have to get references and experience, just like you've mentioned.
It's actually really good that we're doing this because it reminded me I have to do my application for the MCP and I just realized I'm going to do my resume, write the statement. I'm going to have to get the references. So it's just in that space, you are going through the same process as everyone else applying at the same time. You're just applying with the notion that you've, you know, information that you completed placement, your statement will be different, and you'll be applying for credits. So credit to transfer.
Yeah, and I also believe there's bridging programs. So someone who's a general psych who's done the MPP and the internship can come and do a 1-year bridging program to make them a clinical psych after their registrar program. I think it's squished down to usually just a year because obviously they assume you've got quite a bit of knowledge having already got your general registration. So it's important to realize that if you don't get into a clinical program or if you don't want to do a clinical program because you don't have the time to study for 2 years, you can always work as a psychologist in the field and then go back and do a bridging program. And I believe they are creating a lot more of those over the next decade or so. But there's already some out there as well.
The plan is, but it's not something that you're going to find at your regular university. So at this point in time, I haven't looked into it because I'm hoping for the MCP, but I'm open to that down the track. Doesn't matter how long you've been practicing for either, you can do it straight away.
Yeah.
But some might say that you need to have a minimum 4 years practice or 2 years. I'm not quite sure.
That'll be different for each place.
Yeah, but my supervisor is looking into it at the moment, as well as a different form of transferring with experience into a clinical endorsement, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
And there's only about 1 or 2 places in Australia doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I know.
it's very intense and expensive. So it's about recognizing there is that, and that hopefully over the next 10 years they are opening up more because there's going to be a higher need for them. Yeah. And then on top of that, they're going to hopefully reduce the price. But at the end of the day, just because you don't get into the MCP doesn't mean you can't become a clinical psychologist.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the take-home message there.
Mm.
Cool. So how do placements work for both programs, or for the program you're doing, how do placements work?
Every uni is different. My current university, we have, so in MPP, you do 1 placement in your 2nd semester. Some MPP programs, that is simulated placement.
Yeah. What does that actually mean? I keep hearing that word.
Yeah, it's personal opinion, probably needs to be with clients, but it just means that you are working with each other, so your peers in your cohort, and you're doing not treatment on them, but they're your clients and you're kind of simulating through role play. Yeah. Tends to be more the online spaces. Yeah. I know that there are some unis that even if you attend face-to-face in the MPP, that will be your placements. Very mixed views on that, that I don't think are particularly important to discuss right now. But ultimately, you complete 1 round of placement in your MPP in the 1st year, because your 2nd year is ultimately a full-time job. You can do it part-time if you want, but it's a full-time job. So you're seeing people every day and you're not attending classes. Yeah. Because you're actually no longer affiliated with the uni, you've graduated. Yeah. Whereas the MCP, you'll see another, depending on the university, 2 to 3 rotations of placement over a year. So for me, my placement at my university, your first 2 placements, so regardless of whether you're in the MPP or MCP, you'll still do the first one, is internal. So this means that it must be completed at an internal clinic at the university, or at a place that the university has deemed to be internal. So we have a rotation at a clinic that the university runs where we work as Prof Psychs. Yeah. And then the other half of the cohort, because obviously they can only have so many people in an office, the other part actually go to another town, and there's a clinic that provides community access into schools with the Prof Psychs. They travel out to the schools and they work from there where they've been placed. And that's classified as internal because there is a kind of a connection and a relationship between the university and them, and how they've been able to create the funding to do that. Now, other places will just be clinic only. Their clinics might be bigger as well. So depending on where you live, highlight most masters, if not all of them, are metropolitan only. So you are having to look at cities for masters if there is not an online masters. So, I travel to masters because they don't actually run masters in my area unless it's online. And then I wasn't willing to do online. But it's just one of those spaces of, depends on the uni, but for us, for the requirements is in the MPP, you have to complete a child rotation as your placement for the first one, because you're not guaranteed to be transferring, or you might want to, or if you're not in MCP, you have to do your child and community rotation first. So if you look at your accreditation, in masters, you must show competency across 4 domains. And that's your child, so children, your communities, your child and adolescent assessment, and psych assessment and treatment. So adult assessment and treatment. So you've got to show that you're able to work across the competencies before you can graduate. So because you're going to be doing mostly the other adults in and community in the internship. They do get you to do your children and communities rotation first, just to ensure that you are covering that competency, because not everywhere has places where they see children. It is a gap, a very, very big, especially regional. So My university does that. Some other universities might not, but if you are in the MCP, your first rotation can be adults because you will be doing your child rotation second. So it depends, but for the MPP, you tend to see the child. But please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. That's just what my university does.
Yep. Okay, cool. And as far as I know, you do get a bit of a preference list for placements. So they might have like, 5 or 6 different areas and you can kind of put your preferences in. No, not accurate.
No, some unis might if they have different areas, but that is when you're looking at your external placements. That's really the second year of the clinical program.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So you will have internal and then you'll have an external placement at the end of your second year.
Right. And that's where you might get some decision over where you get placed.
So that's where you kind of, the university might have places that are like, oh, we take people at the health system or at the hospital or things like that. Or you might go, hey, I've been working here. Am I allowed to do my placement here? Or this sounds like a really good program. I'd like to get some experience here. So that's where you do your preference in. I believe you get up to 5. You've got to do cover letters for each. And that's just from the group chat of clinical psychs at the moment who have to do it for next year. But you do it for the year beforehand. So you'd be kind of completing it now if you start at the start of the year in MCP doing it full time for this time next year. But most of the time, the universities tend to kind of go, hey, we have these external places that are happy to take you, and they kind of help out in that space. Some universities will make you find all of your placements personally, and they can all be external. It just depends. I know online programs, you have to source your own, and that's because you don't, like, what state are you in? They can't kind of make you move states in the middle of the year. But yeah, there is a potential, but I want to highlight, unfortunately, placement is not paid. Placement does look like a minimum of 2 days a week. If you do not make one of those days because you were sick, you do have to make it up. It does, most placements, my placement is a block of 22 weeks with 1 week off in the middle. Well, not even the middle. And that's non-negotiable. You cannot do a block format where, hey, can I just do 6 weeks of full time? It must be sequential for that amount of weeks. There is just no capacity. You don't get paid. Hopefully that's something that changes. There is a lot of advocacy. There's a lot of difficulty working and then attending classes and doing placements. So I always recommend, if you need to work or you want to work, Masters is the perfect place to go part-time. Because of the stress. It is a pretty big jump up if you're not prepared. And if you're doing placement and coursework at the same time, you're looking upwards of 4 days a week on campus. If your university is a really good university where they like to go, hey, we have all your subjects on 1 to 2 days, not spread out across the week. But your external placement, you are able to negotiate to be paid by the company.
Yeah, it makes sense because you are a provisional psych at that point. You've had 4 or 5 years of study, and you are doing work for that company. So you are seeing clients, you are writing notes, you are doing observations, you are doing assessments, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it is. It does make sense that there's a bit of a push for placements to be paid sometime in the future. I think that would be a good thing to see.
Yeah, I think placements across the board for every profession should be paid, because at the end of the day, you are helping the company out by being there. And, we wouldn't expect somebody to come and work for us for free. So why should we work for others for free, especially in the field that we're working in? But at the same time, there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that we don't know about in businesses that, really recognize why, and funding and insurance purposes. But at the end of the day, there should be a stipend, even if it's a wage or it's a look. As much as it's annoying to be kind of demeaned to $50 a day, which is not necessarily annoying, it's not very kind of humane, but compared to nothing and paying to be there, $50 a day can pay for your fuel to get there. And
it's something, absolutely.
Something, and that's more preferable than absolutely nothing.
Yeah. So that's the placement for the MPP and the MClin as well. As far as I know, the internships are mostly paid, so you're essentially working out in the field. I know if you look on Secret or Indeed for provisional psych roles, a lot of them have like programs for provisional psychs where they'll include supervision within the employment. You'll also be on a wage, usually quite low for provisional psych. So if you're not getting paid for your internship year, I think something's probably wrong, because I assume most are.
It is illegal.
Because you are working out in the field. It is illegal now.
It
Okay.
is illegal.
Yep.
It has always been illegal.
It's always been illegal.
You are on an internship. You're not, you're not doing
Student.
kind of like that 1 week placement in year 10 for school.
Yeah.
My year 10 placement at school, we had to be paid a minimum of $20 for 5 days worth of work. Other people got paid more, but you still got $20. So the internship, if you are being offered an internship where it's, hey, we're going to give you all of this, but we're not going to pay you, run for the hills and report.
Yeah.
This is a consistent issue that's been happening historically for decades.
Yeah.
You've been taken advantage of. It is illegal. If you are not being paid, if you're being paid minimum wage in an internship, that is also illegal. Let's look at your education. Let's look at where you are, who you're working with. If you're getting paid, it's about $23 now an hour for the minimum wage. I personally would not accept a job at $23 an hour working as a psychologist.
Yeah.
Because
know your worth.
Education, if you look at your awards and your EBA, you're actually to be paid higher than that. Now, it depends on where you are. Like regional has lower pays than metropolitan, and community has higher pay than private because you are not a subcontractor, so you get paid per hour your wage. Your employee, you are not paid kind of like the client pays. For me, it's $120 to see me. I only see my hourly wage from that. I don't get that $120 and then pay out to be there, because you cannot do that legally as a provisional psych. You must have full registration to do that. But ultimately, if you are not getting paid in an internship, it is illegal and run. This is a massive thing. A lot of stuff happening. There still are out there. As much as people believe that it's not, it is. But people are very secretive about it. There are also issues around companies getting people to pay them to be there. So they don't pay you a wage, but we're helping you out, so you need to pay us $300 a week or something. No, you are as equal as any other employee out there. You are to be paid as a wage, which means you are an employee, you have your rights, you build your annual leave, you build your sick leave, and then your time in lieu and all of that is dependent on the company and who you work with. So just please really be careful around it, because unfortunately we are a vulnerable demographic because we've
all these requirements you need to fill.
It is expensive to become a psychologist, and you're at this brink of, I just need to get in the workforce. Look at what your hourly is. Look at the demographic. Go on Seek, go on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is better for psychology jobs, by the way. A little bit more professional. But ultimately, have a look. And if you're, for example, based on your hours, if you go full time and it says your area is supposed to be $70,000 to $80,000 for a prov psych and you're getting paid $30,000, I probably wouldn't be taking that job. I'd be raising really big concerns there. But if it's like, all right, well, we're paying you $60,000 and it's normally about $70,000, but we're covering your supervision, that would be appropriate in a sense, in my opinion, because your supervision costs are, you still have to do your supervision every per, I know it's 17.5 hours, roughly. I don't know if that changes for the internship. So you are requiring to have supervision 1 to 2 times a week. That is the hourly cost that it is to see that psychologist. So for example, if I paid for my supervision, which I'm very lucky it's covered by my workplace, I would be paying $220 an hour per week to see her. So it's so, all right, well, what is included in that? So if it is a little bit lower, like by $5,000 or so, asking, what is it? Always know that you can negotiate wage based on your experience and your education, but do not accept non-payments, and please report those people. Even if you know people happening, we are mandatory reporters, not just for abuse. We are mandatory reporters for misconduct within the profession as well. So APRA
Mhm.
report seriously because they're just going to keep doing it.
Cool. I think that's really important. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yep. So know your worth. Don't be taken advantage of. Know at that point you have done a lot of study. You are a provisional psychologist. You should be looked at as like anyone else in the workforce and shouldn't take anything that's unethical or illegal, as you've said. So yeah, great point there. Cool. I think we'll get into the application aspect of it all. So what's typically required in an application? I know it's different for every university, but as far as I know, the sort of main areas are your referees. That can either be professional referees or academic referees. I know some universities want 2 academic referees, some want 1 professional, 1 academic, some want 2 academic, 1 professional. You also need a resume or a CV that hopefully has some experience in the area of psychology. You also do an interview. And your transcript. Anything else?
You kind of covered everything. I would just like to add that most of the time in my experience with universities is that your referees, you need to have 1 professional and 1 academic, not either. If you do not have the capacity to have a professional, you would need to seek 2 academic. Your academic reference will be your supervisor in honours. If there had been issues with that, you can discuss, concerns that you didn't get along or there was some complications. You can ask for the subject coordinator to be your reference academic. However, they will require you to kind of go, well, let's kind of work on things rather than just kind of go to the next step and kind of address those problems.
Yeah.
With the references, your professional reference must have the capacity to comment on your capacity to become a psychologist. So it's not as simple as being able to apply for for honours and undergrad. There is a bit of a process because there are only so many spots. So let's think there are thousands of people, and I don't want to discredit anybody or make anybody think that it's out of their kind of realm and basket. Everyone has the chance and the capacity to. You just have to throw your hat in the ring.
Yeah.
There are so many people applying for only so many small spots, and hopefully this gets bigger and bigger. But ultimately, you have to apply. And if you put your application in and you don't put a statement, like your personal statement, then you're not going to get an interview because you haven't fulfilled those applications, the application properly. So you need 2 references. Your professional must have capacity. So this is somebody who knows about the field, knows about what it takes to become a psychologist, what it includes. Now, you might have difficulty if you don't have experience working with people, like your managers and stuff aren't in that space. It's just about making sure that they can comment on your transferable skills as well. So people who work in supermarket and stuff, great job, right? Really, really important. You can still get into masters. It's just about how your reference is, what you can pull out of your personal life and your education and your experience, how you write about things. You have an equal amount of chance. Yes, it is better to be seen to have clinical experience. However, that's not realistic for us in psychology because you can't work until you do masters.
Exactly.
It's about how you write things.
Paradox.
Yeah, just about how you write things. Really good ideas to have a look at position descriptions for psychologists. So say you worked at Aldi. I worked at Aldi during my undergrad, and I had a great team there. But ultimately, if I just wrote that I worked at Aldi and I did customer service, I probably wouldn't have been looked at that greatly. However, if I said I worked at Aldi and there was lots of time management skills, developed time management skills, critical thinking, evaluation of and observation of people because you sell alcohol. So recognizing when people were intoxicated and communication, helping people in need and stuff like that. So if somebody's not able to reach the top shelf, being able to describe supporting individuals in their daily living tasks. It's how you write it. So looking at what does it take to become a psychologist and what's in the descriptions, and then writing your experience ethically and honestly as well. So don't say these things if you haven't done it, because it will come out very quickly if you haven't. Once you're masters, if you get that far, but also ethically, we have an ethical standard. So recognizing that in our personal and our professional lives, but writing it in a sense of like, all right, well, we need time management in psychology. Well, actually, I had to do all of this within 20 minutes and stuff, and I was pretty on time all the time, so you can discuss that.
Yep. I think people think it's quite odd where you need to be a registered psychologist to work in that field, but you also need to experience to actually get into masters. So it's a little bit of a paradox there. But I think the NDIS is a really good thing that's come to Australia over the last decade that does offer people with an undergraduate degree to get some experience. So NDIS is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So any kind of work in that field I've heard is quite good for master's applications. So that could be disability support work, mental health support work, therapy assistant roles. Yeah, could you talk more on that at all? Are there any other outside NDIS roles that would be looked at as favorable?
Yeah, well, I'm actually not too sure because I haven't looked into the NDIS and I didn't work in that field. And also I live regionally, so we don't have as many kind of spaces for that as Metropolitan does. However, my first job, I got full-time coming out of my undergraduate degree was as a mental health support worker in a subacute psychiatric facility.
Yeah,
the
perfect.
minimum requirement of education was a diploma.
Cool.
So there's lots in community service as well, residential care, out-of-home care, child protection.
Anything really, you're working with people, hey, especially vulnerable, disadvantaged people is going to be good.
100%. And you can write any experience that you have is going to be helpful because you're working with people. Customer service is a primarily, client-focused role, right?
Yeah.
But you don't have to do I only recently heard last year around the behavioural practitioner role. We don't even have them in my area that I knew about until I found out last year, and then I saw there was a couple of them. I thought you would have to have masters. You don't. You can work with your undergrad with that.
No.
And other places, you can actually get hired when you've completed over 50% of your undergrad as well. So as long as you continue your education, you can still get hired, but anything in community services is great. Drug and alcohol, rehab, programs, homelessness sector, Headspace hires people with undergrad. And also your volunteering is really, really beneficial too, because it shows some other skills and different aspects to you as a person. So they're looked favorably as well. Lots of people do Lifeline.
Lifeline's a popular
Lifeline's
one.
great. Seriously, I haven't personally done it. I just didn't have time. It is great, but recognizing every man and his dog is doing it in honours to get into masters. If it's something that you're like, oh, I really like that, but I don't think I could handle that, then okay, there are other things you can do. Honestly, volunteering, if you are somebody who loves animals and you go down to the local shelter every week and you become a cat slave and you clean out the litter boxes, that's volunteering. If you do mentorships, that's volunteering. So what does volunteering mean for you, and how do you what do you get out of it, rather than doing it for the sake of getting into something? Because most people don't continue it in masters because you don't have time. So it's just about what can you have on your plate, and also what are you comfortable with doing. But yeah, your volunteering's a big one, but it's all about your experience. Yes, your transcript does kind of come in handy. Well, not in handy, it is looked at. It is a requirement to have a minimum WAM, minimum score for masters. That is purely because of the workload, and you have to show that you have the critical analytical thinking skills and the ability to question and the ability to learn, because you're going to be learning a whole new thing in masters.
And ongoing as well.
Yeah. Gonna spending hours and hours on SPSS and Genovi and all of that, unless you're doing your clinical dissertation. You are learning to be a clinician. You are learning your micro skills in counselling. You are learning your Socratic questioning. You're not learning theory. You're learning how to do it. So it's just about, you're learning a whole new space, but you still have assignments and you need to hit a minimum criteria for the university. Some unis have a 70% minimum pass grade. So once you're in masters, you must receive a minimum of 70 on all of your assignments. Otherwise, you fail as a hurdle. I am lucky my uni doesn't have that. I will be really honest. I failed an exam in masters last year. I still passed that subject with 68, 69%, which at my uni, 70 is a distinction.
Okay.
So it's just about what you're learning. To be fair, there was a lot of issues with that exam. Most people went really low. So that was why I'm not going to be like, oh, cool, I'm a clinician, but I failed. No. But these things will happen and it's okay. You know, one of the best advice that we can give students going into year 11 and 12 is that if you don't get the scores that you wanted straight off the bat, it's actually okay and it's actually quite normal because you're jumping up. It's the same with masters. Yeah. But at the same time, in masters, scores don't matter because what are you going to next? Yeah. But some unis will have that requirement. And then applications, MCP will have a higher minimum WAM. So I'm seeing that most places need a minimum of 75. Some are in the 80s, depends on the university. The MPP is just slightly lower, so it tends to be at about 65 or so. I'll be completely honest, my WAM for my undergrad degree, I think, was 65, and I got into honours, where the requirement was, I think, 75 or something. My honours WAM was, surprisingly enough, I think 68, and I got into masters. So you can see that it doesn't really take full consideration in your application. Yeah. And you know, it's just about what else can you show, who are your references, who are you as a person, and also one of the big things is how can you cooperate with the group and team environment as well is a big one that they look at.
Yeah, I sort of heard the metaphor of like the scores sort of get your foot in the door, they get your application looked at, but to actually get chosen for an interview, they're obviously looking at all those different aspects of your application, including the referees, like you mentioned, and the student statement, which we will also talk about. I just want to quickly go back to the references for a sec. So I know when I first heard of the idea of you need referees for masters, I thought it was like a job where they would call them and like have a chat to them on the phone. That's not right. So there's a website called HODSPA or something like that, Psychology Reference, which actually got taken down a few months ago. So they're making a new one for this year's cohort. I think it's coming out literally in a couple days. So do you know a little bit about how that works? And do you also know if your referees are writing like a little description of you, or are they answering specific questions? Can you give any sort of guidance on that?
I can give a little bit of guidance. As a student, you actually don't see the references or what they write. Right. However, I was really lucky that I was able to have, a professional reference very, very lovely woman who was a clinical psych that I worked with the ACF, or alongside the ACF. She filled it out for me, and then she actually sent me what she had written just in case it had failed. So just in case the website crashed or something, or there was an incident, she sent me that. So I was able to read what it kind of asked about. So the program is you pay to use it. You have to pay. When I did it in 2021, for 2022 applications, it was $50, and that gives you 12 months. You fill out your information, and then ultimately you put in the email addresses and names of the people that you want to send an invite to, and that's all you do. They get the email, and you can release it to all separate universities. So it's not just per uni. So
they're not writing 20 different referee statements for each university.
It'll collect the statement, and then you can go, I want to send it to La Trobe, I want to send it to Melbourne Uni, I want to send it to Fed, stuff like that. Okay. So it saves a lot of time in that space, and it's the middleman as well gets cut out. But ultimately, it's not they have to answer questions. So from memory, because I won't pull it up on my screen, from memory, they comment on your capacity to become a psychologist, reflective capacity as well. How did they know you? How did they work with you? And what did you do in that space? I was really lucky that my reference did write paragraphs. She's a very, very amazing woman. So in that sense, I had more paragraphs written about me, but the reference can go, was their manager, blah, 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 did recognise reflective capacity as we, requested supervision regularly per month because they wanted to improve, stuff like that. If you don't have a psych being your reference or somebody who has the capacity to comment on your capacity. But it's just about your capacity. How do you work in team environments? Who are you, how are you as a worker as well? Think of those questions asked a normal reference, but make it very psych based.
Okay, great. So yeah, I guess the advice there would just be pick someone who knows you well enough that they can comment on all those things, but also has the effort to actually help you out with the process as well. And in some ideally a role in psychology, but as you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be if you haven't got that experience.
Yeah, it's just about what they write. So if you write that, you don't have in your personal statement also, so it gets looked at all at once. So it's not like, oh, we check all their references first and then we check everybody's statement next. It's kind of like we look at everything at once for the person. And you might comment, I don't have any psych experience, but I found that working here in this role, I was able to learn these skills, and you kind of discuss them and how they've impacted on you and how you feel that would then reflect on your capacity. So if you write stuff like that and you have somebody who fills out your professional form as, hey, I'm just their manager, I'm a manager at Coles, attends work on time, has good time management skills, no complaints, even if they do it really basic, if you've got that kind of information in your statement separate, then that's going to make a bigger difference than if you weren't to.
Cool. Awesome. So I think we'll move on to the student statement. So for most universities require a student statement. It's usually around 500 words. And there's really no guidance. There's not much guidance out there on how to write it. I know a lot of people get very confused, and that was one of the questions we were asked. As far as I know, it's pretty much just about sort of almost 3 different aspects: explaining why you want to be a psychologist, explaining what experience you have that would make you successful in that role, and then also explaining why you're applying to that specific program. So that's the section you might want to alter your application depending on the university, whether it's a specific subject that they focus on, whether it's something about the supervisors who work there. But yeah, making it geared towards that specific university. Is there anything else students should be adding? I know it's also meant to be quite personal, so everyone's is going to be very different.
Yeah. I'm actually really interested that you raised the third part, because that wasn't something that we had for ours, nor was it mentioned, because think of the notion, you have 500 words to sell yourself, but not sell yourself as I'm going to be great for the uni. Sell yourself as I have capacity and I'm telling you why and how I have this capacity. So ultimately, yes, why do you want to become a psychologist? And from what they told us in our master's evening, information evening, and what they tell everybody at our uni, if you say because I want to help people,
they're reading 1,000 of those, so try and make it a little bit less.
You already know that, so tell us more. Why do you want to do psychology? Now, people have lived experience. Let's look at the demographic of psych students and people in the area, in the field. They most likely have lived experience. We see a big correlation in that. So it doesn't mean you have to go into detail around your lived experience that led you to becoming lead to wanting to become a psychologist. But being able to go, I have been touched by mental health within my life, by personal or family members or stuff like that. But it's supposed to be about you. So I'm really interested why they have, in your experience, having to kind of comment on why you want to pick that uni. I feel like that would personally be a waste of words, because by the time you've got to talk about your experience, you've got to talk about.
Is not a lot.
Yeah, it's not. No, it's not. Because you're not rewriting your resume, but you need to put parts in there about your volunteering experience, and it's also about your ability to reflect on yourself as well. So the way that you write it is also taken in consideration, not just what you write. Also,
right. So
there's a lot to it, but I will be very upfront. I mean, I actually like to talk about the personal statements, running an info session as well about the personal statements coming up soon. But for me personally, I wrote about criminal minds in my personal statement, and I said, I was exposed to criminal minds at such a young age, and that, for me, made me really interested in forensic psychology and criminal profiling. And then as I, went through my studies, it really highlighted what I would like to do in the criminal justice system and talk about, I kind of mentioned, I don't want to just help people, but I want to contribute towards, the reducing misdiagnosis, as that was something that I unfortunately had a very close family friend have a negative experience with misdiagnosis for 12 years that did lead to her passing. So, I mentioned that in a very, very small way of, I want to reduce it because of this, but I also want to look at you know, destigmatization and some other aspects in the field that, like, you know, continuing deinstitutionalization, but in an ethical space. So I kind of wrote that, and that was my opening paragraph. Like, I would, if somebody said to me in honours, oh, somebody got into masters writing criminal minds, like, I'd be like, are you kidding me? But that's what I did. And I wrote about, you know, my working at a subacute psychiatric facility. So writing about not being in a clinical space, but walking alongside individuals on their journey of recovery. And, you know, commented, you know, I worked with individuals with borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, delusional disorder, just listing those, because you're not going to really list them in detail on your resume. But then what did I take from that job experience? So that's what I kind of wrote about. And then my volunteering, because to me, volunteering is very, very important to me, something I've been doing for 10 years or more. But it's also that, well, actually, yeah, probably almost 15 years. But it's one of those things of, I take a lot of value from that, and that kind of indicates who I am as a person. So I wrote about that and what I have been doing for volunteering over the last year. And then I spoke about my capacity to become a psychologist and my capacity to reflect and wanting to always improve on myself and take on professional development and know that I'm not going to know everything and we will never be competent, and that's okay. But knowing that I'm always wanting to continue to learn and continue to grow. That's kind of how I wrote mine.
Cool. So I think you raised an important point about not just saying that you want to help people, but obviously there's lots of different jobs where you can help someone. Teachers help people, nurses help people, doctors help people. Why a psychologist specifically? And then, as you said, talking a lot about your experience and how that's helped you prepare for a role as a psychologist as well. And then you also mentioned talking about some specific interests you might have in the field. I've heard some advice being maybe not to be too specific about certain research interests you have or working with a particular supervisor, because that just might not be the case for that university. So you don't want to really give them a reason not to take you if that perhaps wasn't an option. So keep it fairly general. But I think that's all really good advice there.
And just to kind of to add on at the end, you're trying to sell yourself. Recognize that people who are reading these are reading hundreds, if not thousands of them. So what's going to kind of put you out a little bit? What's going to highlight you?
Not a place to be humble. Sell yourself as much as you can, but obviously also showing that humility about wanting to learn as well. Sorry, can you repeat that?
Write humbly, but don't be humble. Because you've worked damn hard to get to this point. You need to sell yourself. And also in that space, if you are too humble, which we know is a cognitive distortion, you get to learn about it in masters if you don't already. But we know that if you're too humble, then how can you prove that you can advocate for a client?
Absolutely.
If you can't advocate for yourself.
Cool.
Now, don't say I am brilliant at this, but being able to write that what you took from that, I really felt that highlighted my skills here, but recognize that I needed support in this space. And what did I do in that space? All right, well, I sought, I spoke to my manager and requested supervisions, or I took away and did some work here, or I went to a leadership retreat or stuff like that.
Cool. I think the area you can be sort of a bit humble is, as you said, the willingness to learn, because obviously being a psychologist is a lifelong learning thing you'll be doing, because obviously there's lots of professional learning that goes along through the whole journey, as it's a constantly changing field. So showing that willingness to have that growth mindset and willingness to learn, all good stuff.
Really good to use that word willingness. That's
cool.
A really key word. So just to put that out there, we can't say too much around how to write it, or what explicitly to write in, like saying the sentences and stuff, but recognizing there'll be key wording. Use your key wording, because it's going to highlight things more than if you were to go, oh, I'm someone who likes to always learn. I am eager to learn. I'm willing to learn. I have a willingness to do this. So just look at your language as well, because you're showing them that you are now at the master's standard as well.
Cool. So we're getting to sort of our final questions here. This is one of the big ones. So how can I prepare for the interview? Any general tips? Just one thing I'll mention with that, I know some universities do what they call multiple mini interviews. So you might sit with one member of the panel for 5 minutes and another for 5 minutes. They might ask like one question each. I know Monash, for example, does that. They mentioned that in their webinar. Whereas other universities, it might be like 4 people on the panel and they're sort of interviewing you at the same time. And they go for about 20 to 30 minutes, I hear. And a lot of the time, the panel's not just going to be members of that program, but also unbiased members from outside in different areas of the university as well. So yeah, any general tips you have for the interview? I know you don't. Don't want you to mention any specific questions because it's going to be very general, not university specific, but general areas, topics that they'll cover.
Really, really interesting. I didn't know that they had mini interviews at some universities, but in my experience, it was 2 people on the panel. We were told it was 3, ended up with 2, and they were all part of the master's program. So we had the person who runs the the course coordinator of kind of like overseeing the whole course, but not the head of psych. So we had them, and then there was another person. There was not many questions. It was more so kind of, it wasn't tell me about yourself, which was great, but it's really around showing your capacity. So, you know, I don't recall anything about my thesis at all. I don't think you get asked. That's kind of done with in honours.
I think maybe for a clinical program, because you do have that research component, they're probably likely to ask you a little bit more about research. No, maybe for a doctorate at least.
Some might, for sure. And I guess it depends on the masters that you go in, because there is some split programs where it's a master's and a PhD combined. The MD Psych or the M Psych. However, they have all been phased out. There's only a couple. I know Monash does one at the moment. Their interview process will be a lot more different.
More research focused.
Research kind of masters or PhD and stuff, you're going to see those. But I don't recall getting asked that at all. It was just about my capacity, my reflective capacity, knowing the APA code of ethics as well, but not just the main code, but the other codes as well. So a little bit of a shocker for some people who don't know. I didn't know until honours. There's actually codes outside of the code of conduct that we need to have access to, and you can only get them through paid access through the APS. These are codes on how to conduct yourself ethically in the regional and rural space, working remote regional, radio as well, radio, television, media. There's a few more.
Marketing yourself as a psychologist, working with kids, marketing yourself. I know we covered in honours. Working with different populations, working with children, working with women, working with men, working with adolescents, etc., etc. So they're definitely a good document to familiarize yourself with if you haven't already.
They're all separate, but it's all about recognizing that we don't just have one code. So that's one of the big kind of questions of what is your, like, do you know your ethics? Because if you've gotten 4 years in and you don't know your ethics, then that's actually not a good thing at all, because psychology is so ethically heavy and driven. Because let's look at, you're working with people, but every single person you work with is vulnerable. So there's a lot of things in that space. It's why we have insurance as well, which is something you don't really have to worry about in a workplace unless, or on placement, because you're covered by the uni. But, you know, there's so many codes and you have to know. Now, you don't have to know the details of every single one for the interview, but you need to know which ones you should refer to in certain scenarios. So obviously we actually legally can't get into the question specifically.
That's fine.
We do know that it's not role play. However, some of the questions are scenario based. So it'll be kind of like this is your information. I'm going to give you 2 minutes and then you tell us about what you would do in this space. And you would need to know, all right, well, this is what's happening in the scenario. What code would that fall under? All right, well, I know that these things would need to be done, or this is an ethical thing, or I'm not quite sure about that. So you would just briefly jot it down and then you would describe. And then if you feel like, and the questions is not about, hey, I know this, but it's, hey, I know this and I justify it through this. And
there might not be a particular right answer, but at least your decision making will kind of show whether you're competent in doing that sort of ethical decision making process.
And I think it's about recognizing that even if you get it wrong, it's okay, as long as you show your decision making skills that led you to that point. They go, well, actually, no, you don't get the feedback anyway, but they might go, look, Sam got this wrong. She referred to the wrong code, but I could actually see why when she mentioned these couple of things, why she picked that code to begin with.
Yeah.
Yes, it was still wrong, but we could see all of this skill that led to that. So that would still kind of be in your favor. You want to get it right because, you've spent 4 years learning this stuff. So you'd want to hope to know it. But this is also an area that ethics don't really get too much detail until honours as well. So recognising that too, and that you're not going to know everything, but you want to just know that, there's a couple of more different codes than just the code of conduct.
Yeah.
And then your capacity as well.
Yeah. I know some universities actually do role plays. I've heard some in Queensland. I think they put this on the website. So I'm not sort of disclosing any information here, but some will have supervision role plays where the member of the board will pretend to be your supervisor and maybe bring up so you actually might do a role play as a clinician, and then you might follow up with a 5-minute role play in a supervision aspect. So that's pretty intense. I haven't heard that happening at too many universities, but definitely be prepared for it. And I've also heard there are some writing activities that some universities ask you to do. So they might give you a case report or something like that, and you'll have to write some sort of formulation statement. So yeah, really make sure you look at the university you're applying for and what that application involves, but definitely be prepared for those role plays, writing activities, anything really. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot there. So you talked about, obviously explaining your experience. Yeah.
I just want to raise, that's just reminded me, I got accepted into another uni that I declined because A, the fee, B, it was just not realistic for me, and it wasn't a uni I wanted to go to. And I didn't have an interview at all. So I got accepted because she did a psychometric test.
Okay, right. I think that's similar for ISN. I've heard that happen.
Yeah, it was ISN. Yeah.
Was ISN.
And I'll say that because they put it up on their website that it's a psychometric test. And I just live too far away from ISN to attend.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it was just that just reminded me, some will do psychometric testing, which was I can't recall how long it took me, but at the same time, if you go for a child protection position, you have to do psychometric testing, same for police and stuff like that. So
I think with the interview, it's just important to think about, like, if you were a member of a master's panel, if you're the head of a master's program and you were looking at students you want to be part of your program, knowing they're going to be psychologists at the end of it, what sort of skills would you be looking for? What sort of questions would you be asking? I don't think it's anything too complicated. It's sort of a lot of things you would sort of predict might look somewhat similar, similar to a job interview. I know you said yours was a bit more informal, more of a discussion. It will really differ depending on the university, but obviously being confident is a key thing. Obviously knowing your ethics, that's a big part of it. Knowing what you do in certain ethical scenarios, being able to talk on your experience and how that would prepare you for the role. Sort of outlining a lot of the things that were in your student statement. But yeah, I think we've covered that well. Do you want to add anything else?
I want to recognize I did mine online because it was 2021, but also they only offered them online because you get booked for about half an hour, but it's more like a 15-minute space, but you have half an hour if you need 15 to, I think mine took about 20 minutes. But ultimately it's okay to be vulnerable, and I think it's actually really important to recognize that, because this is terrifying. So if you don't have many experiences with job interviews, this is like tenfold terrifying. But if you get given an offer for an interview, you're already a step in. So, some universities will say we give all internal students from honours an interview. Now that might be correct, but that also might be incorrect. So it's just about, hey, you got an interview. That's the first big step. So if you go in and
feel confident once you've gone that far.
Yeah, but also be confident about being anxious as well. So it's quite normal to be anxious in interviews. For most people, I'm still kind of like terrified about interviews. But if you go in and you say, obviously you would thank them for the interview and stuff at the start, or thanks for the opportunity. And you might go, just want to let you know, I'm a bit nervous. They're expecting everyone to be nervous and anxious. So if you acknowledge
that's just how you handle those nerves in the actual interview.
But you're also recognizing that you're nervous and you're feeling anxious, and it's stuff that you learn about in in masters, but also you're recognizing that you can be vulnerable to work with vulnerable
Self-aware.
people. And that is a big
Reflective.
thing. So if you go in and go, hey, I'm just a bit nervous, they're actually great about it. They go, yeah, no worries, take your time. They might, it's not like they might, but they will let you know if you have to write anything down, or they'll give you a time frame. And they'll recognize, like, if you stutter over some words, they know that it's nerve-wracking. So just about recognizing, hey, not walking out going, oh, I screwed it up completely because I kept stumbling over my words, but walking out going, oh, I was really anxious, but I know that they knew I was, and that's a symptom of anxiety. If a physical sensation is stuttering. So it's a good thing in that space if you want to recognize, but also being confident in a sense of yourself, of being there, not confident to, I'm going to smash this, because it's not about winning. It's about confidence in yourself. And if you can show that, however that looks like for you, then it's a really good step.
Yeah. I remember watching this video on YouTube about someone who's, I think they're currently doing their clinical masters, and they talked about the whole interview process. And she did 2 interviews where one, she came in really confident and she gave really elaborate, sophisticated answers that she'd practice at home. And she felt really good after the interview, and she actually didn't end up getting a spot in that program. And then she did another interview a year later where she took a totally different approach and was just completely herself as much as possible, wasn't as sophisticated and elaborate with her answers, didn't try and be super fancy and professional. And after the interview felt quite bad about it, wasn't sure if she'd get the position or not, and she ended up getting that position. So I think it's important to keep in mind authenticity as well, and not trying to come across as any type of particular way, not trying to come across in a particular way, but just being yourself and trying to answer the questions as honestly as you can, while also demonstrating your competence as well. People also ask about how to prepare. Just a couple of things that I sort of have thought of is obviously doing role plays with your friends, with family, getting people to do fake interviews with you, and also just sort of writing and thinking. I think people don't think about that much, but just the idea of like thinking to yourself, why do I actually want to do this role? What sort of experiences can I bring up? What sort of future directions might I go down? Just actually having a think about that stuff, writing it down, doing a brainstorm, and also looking over your honors ethics textbook. There's lots of case studies in there where you can kind of read those and sort of pretend and think about what you might do in that situation. Yeah, those are some pretty basic ways to prepare. Did you do anything else in preparation?
Yeah. I always laugh when I talk about it, but it's actually so realistic and really important to do. Talk out loud to yourself. You're not crazy. Walk around the house talking. When you're brushing your teeth, look in the mirror and practice your facial expressions. Talk to the mirror and kind of like read a question and then answer it, but you can see how your face is looking and like your expression, your eye contact and stuff. Talking out loud is really, really helpful, but not in a sense of like, oh, I wonder if I could do this, but more in a sense of, all right, well, thank you for your question. Having that discussion, but out loud. I drive a lot, so I'm talking out loud in my car all the time, and I've noticed it makes a massive difference in my ability to talk about stuff and talk to other people. But practicing that, no one's looking at you in your car. Nobody's looking at you at home in the bathroom. And that's going to allow you to just verbalize. The good parts is start the brainstorming, and then the next step is verbalizing, talking out loud, like you're answering questions, because then you feel more comfortable with answering and saying the words that you're wanting to say. And then on top of that, most universities, if not all, have like Advantage programs or Edge programs. So in those spaces, look at your career advisors, look at kind of like the award processes and stuff, and you will see that they have, you can organize to have mock interviews. So that can be online or in person, and you meet up with, a career advisor, or at our university it's called Advantage. So you would have someone from Advantage, and you would book an interview, and they would ask you interview questions, and you would respond, and then they would give you feedback.
That would be a great idea. Yeah, if you have the opportunity, I'll definitely recommend that.
Yeah, and they're often all online, or they'll have online options. But it's just around making sure that you have access and utilize that space. And I'll tell you right now, there's a few people doing them, and it does make the difference, because you've got them acting professional,
Mm-hmm.
you're having to respond professional, and they go, hey, you actually did really well with this, but I did notice that when you were sitting in your chair, if you have it on, like, you swung. You need to keep an eye on that because that's very subconscious. So really recommend that, so you can get professional feedback, but it's also not biased in psychology, and it's something that you're allowed to do. And they don't know the process, but or the questions, but they'll ask roundabout, and you can go, look, I'd like you to ask me more scenario questions. Even if it's nothing to do with psychology, it'll still help the critical thinking come through, and you can go, oh, actually, no, I can do this.
Yeah, cool. I think the big thing with interviews as well is just understanding that it probably is the most important aspect of your application. And I've heard the way it works with a lot of universities is that once you've got an interview, everyone's pretty much looked at in the same way. Everyone's on an even playing field, and then the interview is really how they select the students. So I know some have like a point system, because obviously they're processing thousands of applications, so they're not looking at every application completely subjectively. They do have like a bit of an objective way they go about it, where they might give points for different experience things you've done, and then they might also give points to your WAM, and then it might also give points to your referee score, and then even your interviews are scored as well, apparently. So you might get like a score out of 10 that's averaged out between the different panel members and stuff like that. So the interview is definitely worth putting a lot of hours into preparing for. These are probably some of the bigger universities. Like I know University of New South Wales, I think they got over 1,000 applicants and they take 40, so they just don't have time to look through 1,000.
I would say now, all universities with master's program will receive over 1,500 applicants per intake. Mid-year, less applicants, because not many people have mid-year available as an offer, and then also students being able to do it. But you are looking, I know when I applied, it was 1,600 applicants for, I believe, 45 spots.
There you go. Yeah.
And yes, I'm one of the lucky 43 or 45, but I actually didn't get in immediately. First round offers come out, second round offers came out, didn't get anything. And it was just 7 days before before uni started, I got an offer.
Right. Yeah.
And I did have to sit a second interview, but it was more so, it was like a 10-minute interview with the course coordinator, and they asked the same question that was in my first interview back in November, I think. And basically they asked me that question. I repeated what I had said from the interview prior, but I added in one extra thing, and it was just about, all right, well, travel comes in. All right, well, how are you getting to uni? If you have to travel, because they look at your address as well, where are you able to stay? Are you looking for part-time, full-time? I said I'd be looking at part-time, and I think that's what got me in, is because I wasn't going to be doing placement until the second year when there'll be more spots available. So I believe that they said that I was told that they had 3 people that they were interviewing, but they could only take 1. But I found out another student got in as well at the same time as me from that, because we both chose to do part-time as a preference. So, like, these are really random. So it's kind of like you can do everything in the world, but the sun's got to be in the right spot, and it's got to be temperature.
I think there is a lot of luck that comes into this. I've just read so many different people's experiences through a lot of the Facebook groups about like what experience they had, what their WAM was, something about their statement perhaps, and how many interviews they got. Maybe they got 0, and then someone else who had, if you look at it sort of objectively, you thought, okay, I'm not sure why that application was looked at as more favorable, and they did get an interview. So yeah, a lot of these things are just going to come to luck, and so don't take it too personally if you don't get an interview.
I think it's really important to recognize, don't take it personally. There's only so many spots available, and the unis will try. The unis aren't against you. So the unis will try absolutely everything, especially the course coordinators, to get as many students in as possible. Now, they have alternative motives for funding for that, probably, but at the same time, they're there and running these courses because they want you to become the best of your ability and become a psychologist. So not against you. It's one of those things, it's just ranked. And so you might be sitting at number 51, and then ultimately there's only 50 spots available.
Pretty arbitrary how it might get cut off. Yeah.
And that's actually how we were taught from my undergrad teachers. They were just like, you get rated into a list, and then they'll go, all right, the top will get these ones. So they'll have 50 spots. All right, we've rated everybody. This is where they're sitting. Offer the first 50. And if somebody says no, number 51 gets an offer. And, you know, another 10 people, then up to 61 gets an offer. And just in that sense, recognizing that it'll come out in waves. So you will get your first round offers towards the end of the year. So around December, start of January. Some unis are earlier, some unis are later. Most people wait until they get a couple of offers before they accept, unless they get accepted into the one that they want to go to. You're more likely to see more second round offers, which tends to come in January, February, more so January. And then if you're like myself, a third round offer really randomly. It was a really random email saying, did you still want to do masters? And I was like, but
those nice email to get.
Can happen. So just about recognizing, put your hat in, be yourself as well, because they're going to know if you come in and you're very prim and proper and that's not who you are naturally and you speak very specifically, they're going to go, what are you hiding? So be yourself, be relaxed, obviously be professional as well, but laugh as well. If you're somebody who, I'm a natural laugher, I will laugh. I laughed through my interview, and it showed that I was somebody who was able to be comfortable having conversations with people. But I had something else I was going to mention that my brain decided to take out of my brain. It's okay. Very normal occurrence to me, but there's a lot of stuff just about being yourself. But social media, don't post stupid shit. Just straight off the bat, they're looking at it. We had students,
or at least put it on maximum private.
No, not even. Options. Not even.
Okay.
No. They will check your Facebook. I'm sorry, they'll check your Instagram. And if you've got pictures of drinking all the time or, you know, at parties regularly, they're not going to really look at you as much as if you didn't post those pictures. Now, people do that. That's okay. That's their choice. Your social media footprint is so important, not just for prospective employers, but for education as well. You get it drilled into you. Do not post stupid shit online, because they will not put you into the group. We had an incident in honours where, and it wasn't even looked for, but the course coordinator had stumbled across, and he was on his personal Facebook profile. He had no one from uni on it. You know, it was very, very random. And a friend of a friend of a friend had liked a comment in a private chat, like private group on Facebook, that was in support of taking down a racist post. And so he saw that randomly, the algorithm showed him, and he saw that there were students from that honours cohort making racist comments, very derogative comments. And I was a student rep at the time, and we were told about this, and we had to inform them, if you're posting that stuff, don't even bother. And he contacted those students and said, hey, I saw what you'd posted online. It is not appropriate. Don't bother applying for us for masters.
There you go. Yeah, don't be stupid. Don't be Use common sense. Be as safe as possible.
Keep them to yourself. But yeah, that's a really big thing, your footprint as well. And that's a really highlighting. Get your LinkedIn page up and going. Have it nice and professional. Start building your connections, because that's where you're going to get job offers. But also, if you have, and it's some things that have jumped up in social work recently, if you have really, really negative, you have freedom of free will, and you're allowed to think about whatever you want, right? But if you have really negative opinions and very strong negative opinions about certain demographics of society and the community, should you really be working in a societal and a community role as well?
Yeah, fair, completely fair.
Yeah. Oh, good. So just kind of
so we might sort of end on this just last question. Can you just quickly talk about the typical costs and the CSP versus the full fee paying, and then we'll just do a quick thing about what people can do if they're not accepted, and then we'll pretty much close it up. Starting with fees.
Fees are rough. So looking at CSP and full fee. CSP is Commonwealth supported place. This is where the Commonwealth takes a big subsidy of your fee to do university, and you only end up paying about 10% roughly of what that course fee would actually be. And that is where you would choose to pay that out of pocket, or you would put it on your HECS debt. So your undergraduate degrees are all CSP. So this is where we're seeing, I think my undergraduate was about $19,000, $20,000. I think now it's about 25, don't know, for 3 years, but it's because I had CSP spot. Now, every person who is I don't know how to phrase it. You have, I can't remember the word, but you are a resident, Australian resident is what I was thinking, sorry. If you are an Australian resident, you have automatic access to HECS. So HECS is our HECS debt that you would then, as you do university and you choose not to pay and put on HECS, that debt will grow. And then once you earn over a certain threshold, which at the moment is $45,000, roughly $1,000, 45, 46, before tax, it'll start coming out of your tax. And then at tax time, you will have it deducted from your return of how much that you would owe. So you're paying it through your tax throughout the year, but not until July. So it's not chipping away. It's just one lump sum after indexation. Cool. So everyone who has access to a HECS debt and chooses to use it will have CSP. Now, all undergraduates are CSP. Postgraduate's a different story. Now, honours is classified as an undergraduate degree, so at some universities, so it is CSP. So your undergraduate degree will, I know that prices have gone up, but you're looking at the range between $7,000 to $9,000 for the year, CSP. This means that you are being covered by the Commonwealth and you are only having to pay that cost. Most universities are turning to private fees in psychology, and this is where you see full fee or fee help. So fee help is combined with HECS as your debt. However, fee help means it is a privatised fee, and it means that they can charge whatever they want. So the difference between a CSP spot in honours, which is $7,000 to $9,000, depending on the uni and depending on the year, of course, that same year at a fee help can be about $30,000 to $35,000. So massive jumps in fees here. So it's just about recognising a lot of places in psychology at university for psychology postgrad do not offer CSP for postgrad. Right. Which means honours can be, up or equivalent. Honours and equivalent can be upwards of 30,000, 40, 35,000.
Yeah, I think mine was about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's rough. It's way too much. I remember when I was looking at honours, Melbourne University was $44,000 for the year. So you're thinking of what your debt is, and then also knowing what the HECS repayments are. So like the minimums and the maximums, you can only hold about 100 and something thousand on it. Yeah. So that's all adding up. And then masters is a really hard space. Masters is, I don't know the true statistics, but I would say probably about only 20 or 30% of institutions offer masters with CSP. And there's only 2 or 3 universities that I know of that within that have CSP only offer CSP spots. The other ones will only offer to about 50% of the cohort, and you don't get told who gets it.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
The differences is astronomical. If you complete and we'll look at the MCP because that's the one that's most heavily subsidised because of the funding and what it's seen like in the institutions. The MCP, if you have a CSP funding, the 2 years will cost you, at this point in time of this year, at my university, $8,200 on HECS for 2 years. That same 2 years, if you do not have CSP, and it's a full fee university, so my uni doesn't do full fee for this, you're looking at $70,000 to $80,000.
It's pretty much like 10x. Yeah.
Yeah. And you are sitting the classes at the same time as students who do have CSP. Then on top of that, the MPP has, so if the university has CSP funding for MPP, it is not as much as the MCP funding. So you're looking at my MPP year was $15,000. That's with CSP. Without it, it's $35,000. Yeah. So just looking at the fees for the university is really, really important. What are you willing to put on your HECS debt? Are you comfortable knowing you have to pay this back? Now, because as a psychologist, you will be earning over $45,000, $46,000 a year before tax. So you will be having to pay it back. HECS debts impact ability to get a mortgage as well. So if you're wanting to build a house or buy a house, knowing that it will reduce the amount that you are able to borrow, because it is still seen as a debt. It's just seen as a interest free. It has indexation every year as well. So thousands of dollars are going on it every year because of indexation, depending on CPI for the year. So ultimately, what are you willing to take on? And then where are you willing to go? Most universities have fee help. So knowing that it is expensive, most online offers are kind of fee help as well. But what are you willing to do? I'm not willing to take on any fee help at all. I will only apply for CSP only, and that limits my range very, very small. And that's okay. But that's a choice that I'm willing to make. Because I don't want to have $100,000 in HECS debt, because that is what it's leading to be if you have an undergrad and postgrad in psychology for fee help.
Okay, thanks for outlining all that. I know it's a lot of complicated stuff, something I didn't necessarily know about, so it's good to find out. I'm sure that'll be really helpful for people to consider.
Very hidden. You don't know that either. I met a lovely, lovely person on placement who's doing placement for a different degree at the same school, and they weren't aware what CSP was, and they weren't aware what their fees were, or that they just knew that they didn't pay for uni because it just disappeared. And I said, so it means you have a HECS debt? And they're like, what is that? So we really need more education in this field, because if you aren't very particular around which one you go for, and that's okay, it will lead to, like, I mean, I know that the average, if you do an undergrad with CSP and you do your postgrad non-CSP, over $100,000. The HECS limit is 107, 110, I think. I think they're trying to reduce it lower to 100. We are not in the dentist and the medical field, so we do not get the higher ones. So recognizing that once you go over your threshold for HECS, you cannot continue to add onto your HECS, and you will have to pay out of pocket. So if you do, say you have an undergraduate degree that costs you 30, and then you do a pathway option. So, you know, you did undergrad in, let's say, Bachelor of Arts, you do a grad dip, that's 35,000. No grad diplomas are CSP as well, like the pathway ones, 30,000. Then you've got your advanced, which tends to be, if you don't get a CSP spot, you're looking at about 35. Then on top of that, or honours, you might still get honours, so it'd be cheaper, but if that's the pathway you choose, and then you do a $70,000 master's, everything over, say, 107,000, you are paying out of pocket, and the price does not change.
Cool. That's great for people to keep in mind. Cool. So we're going to pretty much wrap it up. We're just going to quickly finish off with what students can do if they're not accepted. I think the advice there is pretty general, that, you know, you can always obviously reapply the next year if experience was the reason you didn't get in. Obviously getting some experience in the field in the areas that we spoke about at the start, in community work, NDIS, behavioral practitioner roles are really good. They're a really emerging field. If you look up behavioral practitioner on Seeker Indeed, there's so many roles coming out in that, and they're really geared towards fourth year students, people that have done an undergrad in an allied health profession. But yeah, just general maturing, and I think it's important to, if you're really wanting a spot, to apply to every program you would see yourself going to. So even if that's interstate, even if that means doing 20 applications, it's hard to give a sort of general scope about how long an application takes. But would you say it could be somewhere between half an hour and 2 hours, something like that? So maybe doing one, you probably couldn't do more than one a day. So factoring that into when the applications close.
I think it's about being realistic of how many you're applying for and how many applications are you doing. So some people might say that it will take, you know, they did half an hour a day. Fantastic. Some people go, oh, I smashed it out in 1 hour and that's all I did. I didn't realize you had to write different applications for different unis. So the only other unis I applied for, I just sent the same personal statement and resumes. So realistically, I did one worth of work and then that was it. But I think it's also about how you work as well. And if you've never done anything like this before, be patient with yourself. For some people, it might take half an hour. For some people, it might take all day or all night. It's okay.
Yeah.
Just give yourself time.
Yeah.
And
Start getting the documents ready now. Start a little folder with your academics transcript, your CV, a general maybe template for your statement, quickly as you can, so that you're not so super stressed when it gets to like October, November, when applications start to close. Get as much as you can organized now. Yeah.
Recognizing we're a week into August, applications will close. Some universities will close in September, some will close at the start of October, and actually some would be closing in August. So look at when your university that you apply to will close, because they're different.
Cool.
Don't think that, all right, this uni closes in October, the others will as well.
Yeah.
I remember looking at the start of the year and found out that one had actually closed halfway through August.
Don't let that happen. Yeah, that's a good lesson.
So
I didn't know some close in August, so I'll definitely be looking into that.
Yeah, and they change every year as well. But yeah, just kind of look at, if you focus on, I would actually recommend focus on your resume first, because you don't need to change that. Write your resume, have a main template. So I have my big resume that has all my info that's kind of important to know, not my 15-year-old jobs, but
Red Rooster.
And then I have my
psych
resume. So my psych resume, that then obviously that will become my main resume. But when you don't have much experience, well, I don't need to talk about all of the time I worked at KFC for 4 years, but I can talk about the professional development certificates I've done, stuff like that. So you just have your main kind of like template, and then you have your specifics. And if you're going into psych, you want a psych specific one. Once you do your resume, that's done. You don't need to be rewriting it for every application. It's just your personal statement that might need to change, but it's just about having a core one and then changing little bits and pieces. You can copy and paste your own personal statement because you've written it. So you can do that for applications.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. That's great advice. All right, so I'm pretty much going to wrap up there. I think we covered a lot, but there's probably a bunch we didn't cover. So the comment section is down below for people to ask questions, add to if you know the answer. We'll keep it pretty open. I'll add anything that I find out after this. But yeah, thank you very much to Sam. And cheers, everyone.
Cool. No, thanks to anyone who watched all the way.
Absolutely. I'm going to put timestamps, so if people need to skip to certain areas, that'll be an option for people. But yeah, thanks for listening.
No, and I want to say to everybody, Sam is the one who organized all of this. So please, he's done fantastic, and he's really wanting to advocate and support himself, but everybody in the field that's in the same position as he is going for masters. So
I know not everyone has the luck of finishing mid-year. I've had a bit of time to look into all this. So a lot of students are still studying, and they'll be studying by the time their applications are due. So hopefully I can give some value to those people. So yeah, thanks, Sam. I appreciate that.
No, I reckon keep an eye on this guy. I think he's going to be big sometime soon. But yeah, I think also I just want to add very, very briefly, if you don't get in, it's okay. Have a cry. Cry as much as you want. Have whatever you want to eat. Relax. Watch your favorite Netflix show. And then, you know what? Go work. Go for a holiday, because once you're in masters, it's just, you get told don't get married, don't have a child, don't go on holidays, go overseas. To get told don't work.
Head to the ground for a good few years there, isn't it?
Yeah. So, cool. You know what? It's actually, for some people, it's a bit of a blessing not getting in the first year, and that's okay. Have a break, because you've bloody well deserved it and you've earned it. So be kind to yourself and have a break.
Agreed. Cool. Thanks, Sam. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Cheers, everyone.
Easy done. Bye.
Bye.